everyone. Welcome to episode 238 of the Book Cougars, two middle-aged women on the hunt for a good read. I'm Emily.
And I'm Chris.
We're sitting together again.
We're back at Book Cougars headquarters.
It's so nice. I had a great trip to Colorado. It's always nice to come home, especially when I have my bookish friend to look forward to.
Yeah, so we're sitting here at our two little tables facing one another with stacks of books in between us and e-readers.
And computers and phones. We have so many things that we reference as we're talking to each other.
Yes, and we have so many places where we are online that we thought we'd give a little bit of a rundown of places where we are online and how people can find us, just because we know we have new listeners. And we've also decided to make some social media changes.
Indeed. We have been talking about this for a little while. There's lots of different social media platforms, but we have decided for now to focus on Instagram and Facebook.
Yes, we're trying to keep it simple. We needed a little bit of we didn't need a little bit of anything. We needed a lot of change in terms of like our workload and just like stuff that weighs on your mind about like, oh, I need to do this, I need to do that. And social media does take a lot of time.
Yeah, and it's just a question of where we want to be focused so that when people comment and reach out to us, we follow it and know and want to be in touch with you. That's the whole point of it for us.
Be better engagers,
Yes.
you know. So we have engaged with people on like Blue Sky and Threads, and in the past we were on Twitter. We still have our accounts there, but we just won't be posting on them for a while or really even monitoring them. But if you connect with us on Instagram or Facebook, we'd love to see you there.
And you can always email us at bookcougars@gmail.com. We're also on Goodreads. We have a Goodreads page there that you can join. And under that page are threads that have discussions on each of the episodes, on our read-alongs, and on our buddy reads.
Yes.
And sometimes just open questions. Like right now, one of the question topics is about ghost stories and if you have favorite ghost stories. Join us there. And also other listeners are there, so you can engage with them, which is fun. And those are open 24/7.
Right. And same with YouTube. We're going to keep going with YouTube, aiming to post one video a week. That doesn't always happen, especially in the summertime when we're both out and about, sometimes on vacation or traveling. But you can find us there too on YouTube.
And then how can you support us? There's different ways you can support us, including our Patreon page. If you've never heard of Patreon, that's a platform where you can support people doing creative endeavors. You can join us at as little as $1 a month and up to $50 a month. If you're at the $1 or more level, you are eligible for our monthly book giveaway. At $5 or higher, you're eligible to join us for our monthly reading salon, which takes place on the fourth Sunday of the month at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. A Zoom conversation. Sometimes we have a topic, sometimes we don't.
Right. And Patreon is a place to support creators financially. And we do have expenses for this podcast, and those contributions definitely help keep us going and give us time to read as well. Because I know when I used to edit the podcast, it would take like 8 hours, and that would be a big chunk. That would be a whole day practically. So we appreciate everyone who can contribute that way.
We also accept personal donations and PayPal, and all of that information is available at bookcougars.com. There's a tab for subscribe, and that has information about how to also support. I think it's support/subscribe. We'll put that in the show notes. At that page is also how you can join our completely free monthly newsletter, which we often forget to mention on the podcast.
Right. We send out one newsletter a month on the last day of the month, and that is full of whatever we've been up to and sometimes what's coming up, especially like what the latest monthly Patreon giveaway might be. And there's also opportunities for publishers and authors to do sponsorship ads there.
Yeah, as well as on the podcast. Right. And if you have an interest in that, please feel free to email us at bookcougars@gmail.com. I think that's all the housekeeping. Did we forget any place that we are?
Well, I don't think we forgot a place that we are, but I did want to also just mention that for our quarterly read-alongs that we do, those conversations on Zoom are completely free. You do not need to be a Patreon member. The only thing you do have to do is register for that conversation to save your spot, because we do cap it.
Yes. And our next read along is The Upstairs House by Julia Fine, with a companion read of The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Boy, since we've chosen that companion read, I feel like it's come up in conversation several times.
Yes.
So interesting. And that is August 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, just email us to hold your spot. There's still spots open for that conversation, which one of our readers / listeners has already read the book. Karen, we're looking at you. And she told us that it's another book that should lead to good conversation, which is the best kind of read-along book choice. So We're so excited to hear you say that, Karen. Thank you.
So thank you to all of you who listen to us, long-term listeners, and our new listeners. Thank you so much for reaching out and letting us know that you're enjoying the back episodes, which always makes me cringe a little bit because I know some of those early episodes must be a little rough, but thank you so much. We appreciate you listening in with us and sharing your bookish life as well.
We sure do. And actually, I guess we should say we drop episodes every other Tuesday, but that might be obvious.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, we have a new listener who just reached out and she said, I'm on episode 207 and the interview was so fun and interesting. And I was like, oh, I've got to go look it up. I don't know who 207 was. And it was Rebecca Romney.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, which is really cool and interesting that that book has published. And we had this great conversation over on YouTube with you and somebody else saying that they think the publishing industry should go down in flames if the book doesn't win awards.
Right, totally. Yeah, and
Time passes.
Another listener who's on episode 37, I think she said, going back. So
yeah. So we appreciate all of you. Thank you for being here. Let's get down to business. Chris, what are you currently reading?
Well, I'm currently reading Summer on the Lakes in 1843 by Margaret Fuller. I'm really happy to be jumping into this experience. For those of you who might be new, I'm reading the collected writings of Margaret Fuller. It's a new edition from Library of America, and I plan with a group to read the whole shebang from page 1 to 900 whatever from now to September. And I've read Summer on the Lakes in the past, so it's been really fun to revisit. And there's, of course, so many things I forgot. And I think now that I know more about Margaret Fuller since that first time I read it like 30 years ago, I'm more relaxed about reading her because she's not a easy writer. You do have to pay attention. You know, she's writing in the 19th century, and she was so smart. Like, she was, as Emerson said, the most well-read person in America. She really retained everything she read is how it feels because there's so many classical allusions and stuff in her writing. But I was surprised by how funny she can be. Like, there's this one scene. So it's 1842. The frontier, in quotation marks, is opening. And she takes a trip from Niagara Falls. And then they take a steamer to Chicago, the Great Lakes area. And while she's in Chicago, she's there for like 10 days. And then they take like a 2 to 3 week tour on a Conestoga wagon, from the sound of it, through the prairies of Illinois. And she's describing how it's like a group of 20 women and a guide, from what I gather. And they stop usually at people's houses to sleep, you know, these little frontier
20
log
women
cabins, you know. And so at this one place, it's like a public house of some kind. And all the women were going to be sleeping in, I guess, the tavern area of this place where all the drinkers have been. And so once the drinkers leave, the women can settle down to sleep. And Margaret Fuller's sleeping on like the dinner table in this tavern, which kind of cracks me up to think about. But she talks about this one woman who was, oh my gosh, I wish I wrote it down, but something like that. She was saturated in the fluids of Britannia to the extent that she could not sleep that night. And she stayed up properly dressed with her nightcap on in case someone should walk back in. So just that kind of contrast is kind of funny. Mm-hmm. And Margaret's writing at a time when American writers and artists were trying to establish something that was uniquely American versus just copying stuff from the British or Europeans. So yeah, more to come on that. Really enjoying it. She's not easy to read, but she's very enjoyable when you let yourself go and just kind of pick up what you can pick up and not try too hard, I think, the first time around anyway.
Yeah. And Summer at the Lakes means the Great Lakes, so she's touring the different Great Lakes. Is that what it means? Okay.
Yeah, so she's in Illinois now. I know there's a chapter in Mackinac Island. And she's seeing the Native Americans who are currently being displaced. And that is a fascinating thing to try and wrap your head around, that there were homesteaders there already in land that had been taken from the Native American people, and they're still living there in small groups. And here she is, a tourist, seeing them. So, like, what a time.
Yeah. And the foundation of our country, which is so interesting. Yeah. Well, I'm reading a book that was a surprise to me. I didn't plan to read this. It's called BUCKEYE by Patrick Ryan. This is an advanced reader copy. Thank you to Random House. And it pubs on September 2nd. And it's a big book that I wasn't expecting to read. It's 452 pages. It takes place in Bonhomie, Ohio. So it's a good Midwestern novel. That is not a real town. I looked it up. Interestingly, the name really caught my imagination because that means friendly or cheerful. And, you know, I think Midwestern Ohioans are known to be that in a lot of ways. Some real towns are mentioned, like Toledo and Akron and Columbus. So it is a very Ohio novel. And it starts off with our main character, Cal Jenkins. And I had to read the first 2 pages aloud to the gentleman caller because the writing is so good and it captures you right away. The first sentence is, Cal Jenkins was born in the spring of 1920 with one leg shorter than the other. I'm like, okay, tell me more about Cal. Just 2 inches shorter, but that was enough to make plenty of things difficult. So it goes on to talk about, you know, what's hard when you have a shorter leg, but also that he wasn't able to enter the war. And that really impacts a man during that era because a lot of men leave and you're the one left behind. And then the novel goes on to bring in other characters. When I talked about Ocean Vuong's The Emperor of Gladness and talked about it being an epic, and we talked about what an epic is, I realized that wasn't an epic. This is really an epic novel. Even the blurb on the back from Ann Napolitano says, this captivating epic weaves the intimate lives of 2 Midwestern families across generations from World War II to the late 20th century. And so as he brings in other characters, including Cal's wife, and then another woman who we learn her backstory, she was dropped off at an orphanage, and she ends up in Bonhomie as well. And then she marries a man, Felix, who is a closeted gay man who ends up in the Navy in the war, which is complicated. And Patrick Ryan is a gay man. He's happily married, or so the acknowledgments at the back of the book suggest. And I feel like he's handling that story arc with such grace, both from the vantage point of the woman who's married to him and for Felix's own life and what he is seeking. I love this novel. I know people know Patrick Ryan. I had never heard of him. I saw him interviewed and thought, ooh, I've got to get my hand on this. And I am loving it. I also have the e-arc, which is really nice at night in bed with the, you know, Kindle being backlit, but also to give my hands a rest because it is a heavy 452-page novel.
Yeah, indeed. Having the Kindle, I have a Kindle and a Kobo, and I was reading the Margaret Fuller in paperback, or hardcover. It's a hardcover book. And, you know, reading in bed at night, it's just not comfortable. And then the light situation always bothers Laura and stuff. So I just purchased it for my Kobo because the other night, after I'd finished a book, I thought, all I really want to read is Margaret Fuller.
Yeah.
And so I'm reading her kind of hybridly, too, in that way.
Yeah, it really does make a difference. Oh, I wanted to read, if you would indulge me, there were just 2 things I wanted to read. Becky is Cal's wife, and she's just moved into a new house, and her neighbor from across the street, Mrs. Dodson, comes over. And Mrs. Dodson has just told her about the losses she's had in her life, including children. And Becky thinks she couldn't imagine getting through something like that as a parent and said as much, but Mrs. Dodson said time helped. Time was like a rock bed with a lot of layers, she said, then took a moment to find the word she wanted. Strata. Even the most unbearable things become fossils after a while. It's just sentences and sentences like that. Beautiful, beautiful writing. Again, it's called BUCKEYE by Patrick Ryan.
You know, I've been thinking, too, about the whole epic conversation that we had. It's like epic is a feeling, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I do think it has to do with multiple characters and spanning a period of time.
Oh, yeah. So form.
Yeah.
Form is one thing, but then feeling can be another. And then there's also like epic, dude.
Yeah.
You know, like that was an epic party or whatever.
An epic
in that
trick
kind
on
of
your
way.
skateboard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I also think, as I've been reading it, and this is a strange question to ask yourself, but, we have so many books now, and so many books are published. And I was thinking, like, why do I care about these characters? And why do I care about this story? And that's the work of the author, right? Mm-hmm. The writer, I should say. It's the work of the writer. And he definitely is making me care about these characters.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, it is really true. In a world with billions of books, when that one comes along, that really captures you.
Yeah. That's 450 pages. Because you all know my adoration of the 250-page book.
Indeed. I'm also listening to an audiobook and talk about like the foundations of America, which you kind of mentioned earlier. I'm listening to A True History of the United States, Indigenous Genocide, Racialized Slavery, Hypercapitalism, Militarist Imperialism, and Other Overlooked Aspects of American Exceptionalism. This is by Daniel A. Jerson, and he served in the Army. He was deployed and saw combat, and he is now an instructor of history at West Point. So I thought, wow, interesting credentials, interesting title and subtitle. And this book was published earlier. This is the release of the audio version, which I got an advanced listener copy through Libro. So thank you, Libro, for that. He reads it, and he reads it very deliberately. So I did up the speed a bit after I got comfortable with his voice. And it's a big book. I forgot to look at the pages of it, so it's long. And I'm not listening to it consistently, just kind of here and there in bursts. But he really lays things out, like talking about the early foundations, like Jamestown being the first white settlement, and that was about making money. People always wonder about venture capitalists. That's the term he uses. Like, this is a tradition that started at Jamestown. Like, that's how far back some of these things go that he's tracing. And just about how, because they were venture capitalists, investors, they wanted to make money as cheaply as possible. Hence, enslaving people was a very easy way to do that. Indentured servitude was kind of a pain in the butt because, after these people are done with their servitude, they're going to need land. We don't want them to be taking up any of our land, so let's just invest in enslaving people. So that's really a different way to look at that situation in Virginia, right? But then what do most people think about with early America? They think about the Pilgrims. Mm-hmm. They don't think about the Puritans as much. He equates them to jihadists in the Middle East. He's like, that's what they were. They were religious extremists. It was a religious extremist community. No one would want to live there.
And they were fleeing religion that they didn't agree with.
Right. Yeah. As opposed to the Pilgrims, who were much more like, we're fleeing too, but we want to be here and we're more open Christians. That is not something he says. But he just really talks in about, like, why is it that most people think about pilgrims and buckles on your shoes and being fed by the local Indians versus these other two extremes, which are extremes that are still very alive and well in America today. So I'm enjoying it very much when I do listen to it. Again, that is A True History of the United States by Daniel Jerson. So the book itself was published in 2021, if you were wanting to check it out. I'm not sure if the audiobook is out now or if it is releasing soon.
Sounds really informative.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing where it's going. So, Emily, what have you recently finished?
Well, I forgot to talk about finishing this book. I finished it right before I went to Colorado. And part of the reason I finished it is because before I went to Colorado, we sat down to record a video for BookTube on our Big Book Summer reads. And I had gone to the library to get a couple of the books out, and there was a hold on my ability to check out books because I had not returned this book. And I had not returned it for so long that it was in that stage where they wanted to charge me for it. And the librarian looked at me and said, "Do you know what book you have out?" And I was like, I do. It's on my nightstand, and I'm hoping to finish it tonight, which was 2 days before leaving on vacation. Anyway, I'm talking about Feeding Ghosts by Tessa Holes. This is a graphic memoir. It won the Pulitzer Prize this year. It was her first book ever. It took her 10 years to write this book. She researched, she wrote it, and she learned to draw. It is definitely going to be one of my top 10 of the year. It may even be a top 10 of all time. I'm always hesitant to say that I have top 10 books of all time. But it is about 3 generations of Chinese women. Tessa is the great-granddaughter. Her grandmother was a well-known journalist in China who had to flee. Her mother then was impacted by this traumatic childhood that she had in China. And her grandmother, her mother's mother, ended up suffering from mental illness that Tessa as a child never understood. And when she became an adult, she kind of refers to herself as a cowboy that went out to kind of leave her family behind so she could discover who she was. And in a lot of ways, that means you have to separate yourself from your family. But mental illness is really tricky because you don't understand it. And towards the very end of the book, one of the things she wrote that I found so poignant was, "It's much easier to call someone crazy than it is to truly face the magnitude of how they were wounded by the past," which really is, to me, the subtitle of this book. And she did a lot of work on herself. She and her mother did a lot of work. And her grandmother passes away during the writing of this. So she really can answer some things well, and some things, remain a mystery to her, even though she did a lot of research and did a lot of trips to China. But one of the things that I thought, oh my gosh, when I got to this part of the book, and I took a picture of it because I did indeed return it to the library. Apologies to people who were waiting for it on hold. I should have written down where she is. I can't remember. She's in a country where she feels a little othered because she is half Chinese. Her father was from, I believe, the Netherlands. And so she's somewhere where she's feeling a little bit like she stands out. So this page, and I'll show this to you, Chris, after I read it, she's biking and she says, "But the book that finally snapped everything into place found me on the coast." Because she did a lot of reading to understand life, as we can all relate to. "Craving a break from being a spectacle everywhere I went, I holed up for a few days in a popular beach town to hide among white tourists. I stashed my gear and reveled in the joy of an unloaded bike," because she had been touring the country by bike, "scouring 60 miles of coastline and popping into every ecotourism lodge I could find. At each one, I'd drink a single cocktail and raid the book exchange, which is how, beneath a thatched hut on a remote beach, a line from Willa Cather's 'O Pioneers' stopped me in my tracks.' Freedom so often means one isn't needed anywhere." The clarity of those words was absolute and piercing, naming what I'd been struggling to face. Sealing myself within a cowboy had broken my web of human connection. While cowboys see more beautiful sunsets than almost anyone, they almost always watch them alone. I knew I needed to change my life in a large and real way. Wow. Willa Cather. So she ends up going home and really facing the things she needs to face instead of running from them.
Oh.
Y'all, this book is so beautiful, and I really, really took my time with it. I read each page, then I looked at the pictures. Read the page again often. It is such an amazing achievement. I understand why she won the Pulitzer. Highly recommend.
Wow. I need to read that.
Yeah, it's really good. And it's one to own. I refused to take it back to the library because I wanted to finish it, but it takes time to get through. Like, it's easy to pick it back up and dip into it. You can be reading other things, which is what I did.
Nice. Yeah. Wow. Well, this whole issue of the past and dealing with one's history is really a big theme in the novel I finished, which is Silas Mariner by George Eliot, which is about a weaver named Silas, who's the main character. Silas Mariner was first published in 1861, and the edition that I read was one that George Eliot revised and was published in 1878. I haven't looked into the details on like what she did revise, but you know how writers, when they, further develop their chops, can go back and quote, improve upon earlier works. But this one is about Silas, who's at the beginning a youngish man who's betrayed, kicked out of a religious community, and is on his own and lands in this small village as the outsider. And he becomes a miser with his bags of gold under his floorboards and everything. And I don't want to give too many spoilers, but as you can imagine, a miser with gold in his floorboards means he's probably going to get robbed at some point, which is what happens. And then a toddler comes into his life that transforms everything. And he raises this girl as his daughter. And there's another storyline with the wealthy people in town. They focus mainly on two brothers of the four, but they're the two eldest brothers are very competitive with one another. One of them does things, and there's betrayals there as well, and regrets. And for Silas, he has to go back and examine something before he can truly move forward. And for the wealthy squire sons, one of them has to deal with something that he's done to be able to move forward. So it is very much like you do have to deal with what's happened to you to be able to release that eventually and live a happy life. And I mean happy in the broad sense of that, you know, a life that's not weighed down by guilt or mental challenges that can eventually be healed. Mm-hmm. So it's a beautiful book in that way. I really loved it. I could easily see rereading this one. It's a short book. It's under 200 pages as compared to like Middlemarch, which is definitely a big book. And one of the other issues that came up in this book, it made me think of when you talked about reading Memorial Days by
Geraldine Brooks.
Right. And how there's a situation in there with this child who'd been adopted and raised in this family who is now a teenager and might be, quote, taken back. Something similar happens in Silas Mariner. And you can be swimming along in this beautiful scene and then something gripping happens. And I got teary-eyed reading this, which it's amazing to me that a book that's, you know, like 200 years old can make me teary-eyed.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah. So beautiful book. If you're looking for something short and a classic, Silas Mariner by George Eliot might just scratch that itch for you.
Well, I finished another book. I seem to have a theme that I wasn't planning to read. I think this was after our read-along of The Good House when we stayed on for a minute with Aunt Ellen, and she put this book up and swung it up in the air and said, "You have to read this. It's Beautyland by Marie-Helene Bertino." And so, you know, Ellen says to do something, I do it. This book spanned 40 years, and it starts with the birth of Adina. And her mother has a really difficult birth and says she sees a light, you know, and thinks she's going to die, but she ends up surviving. And she's a single mother. The father doesn't have a role in their family. And she struggles. They don't have a lot of money, but they have a lot of heart and a lot of love in their life. And Adina's a little bit different. She feels like she doesn't belong. She might actually be from outer space. So it's a coming-of-age novel. Indeed, she is communicating with something out in the world, an alien of sorts, via fax machine, which is really fun. And I just thought I would read to you to kind of understand how the novelist handles it in the book. Adina has just had this dream. And we've talked to novelists about writing about dreams. They're always like, oh, it's scary. Your editor tells you to cut it out. But this was a really good dream that described kind of, you know, her waking up in a shimmering area. And that's how she realizes that there's something else out there that she communicates with. And that they communicate by intuiting with each other when she gets into this room. And that's what this dream is about. And she wakes up in her earth bedroom, nostrils filled with the tang of cleaning supplies. She lazes in and out of sleep, considering a space near the door where morning light has collected into the shape of a ship. Seeing the fax machine on her bureau, she remembers the images from her dream. She writes on a sheet of paper, "I am an Adina." After thinking about it, adds, "Yesterday I saw bunnies on the grass." She feeds her note into the machine and presses the green button. The paper jolts through the tumbler with a robotic scanning sound. It is so early, even the boulevard is silent. Her mother is asleep in her bedroom, and Adina is awake in her own, hovering next to an office machine, unsure what to hope for. After a moment, a red light she hadn't noticed activates. Incoming fax! A sheet of paper squeaks through the tumblers. Describe bunnies.
Wow.
So the novel kind of takes off from there. This happens on page 12, so this isn't a huge spoiler. And she befriends people in this community, and she is always reporting back through fax machine about what she's learning about human beings and life and love. And Beautyland, the title, I was looking for the reveal of what does this mean. And very early in the novel, very soon actually after what I just read, it's a store. It's like a supply store, a dash in and out supply store called Beautyland that they go in and out of. It's part of the story throughout, and it changes as she ages. It becomes a different kind of store. But I was thinking, like, what does that mean, Beautyland? You know, that the earth is beautiful, humans are beautiful. I don't know.
Yeah, it is an interesting title.
Yeah. I'd like to ask the author question.
I was going to ask what that little pinkish thing is on the cover.
Oh, Tea Time Book Club.
Oh,
I don't know what that is. And, you know, as she ages, she also experiences very human things like death and friends that get sick and things like that. And one of the statements that caught my eye was when someone says to her, "You're never going to be totally okay ever again." And that was after she suffered a loss of a friend. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so true. You're never okay again.
Yeah.
There's also a lot about how quick life is. So it's a coming of age novel. It's also a missive on the complexities of human life and life on Earth. I will say that I also tried the audiobook and it didn't work for me, which is rare. But I felt like the way this book is written, we have an interview with the author Clare Beams at the end of this episode, and she blurbed this book. So when we logged in with her, I said something to her like, oh, it was so fun to be finishing The Garden and then starting this book and seeing that you blurbed it. And one of the things she said is that Marie-Helene Bertino's sentences are so crisp. And she does have a background in poetry, I think, which makes complete sense. And so it just didn't work to listen to it. I wanted to really be able to gaze at the words and enjoy the book that way. Such an interesting book. I will say when you finish it, you will want to talk to somebody about it. If you're looking for a book club pick and you're reading fiction, highly recommend Beautyland, Marie-Helene Bertino.
Very nice. You know, you saying that, wanting to talk to somebody, it made me remember that we also have a Book Cougars phone number.
We do.
That we always forget that we have that too. It's come in really handy sometimes when we've asked people questions, and it's sometimes just easier to say an answer, to give a verbal response than to try and write something out.
Or if you have a love-hate affair with email like I do, maybe you just want to talk.
Right. Exactly. Right. So if you should want to leave us a voicemail, 860-391-6674 is our Book Cougars hotline phone number. Feel free to leave us messages there as well. We may not reply with a voice message ourselves, but we will get back to you for sure. Are we ready to talk about our short stories?
We're ready to talk short stories.
So we're talking about 2 short stories this time that are in the Penguin Book of Ghost Stories from Elizabeth Gaskell to Ambrose Bierce. This is a book that we've been reading throughout 2025 in support of our year of reading ghost stories. We thought it would be cool to read some classic ghost stories, and it is cool because you get to see like some of the earliest instances of types of ghost stories or new developments in ghost stories, I think is kind of the joy of reading a collection like this. As Emily and I have discussed, it's not always like fun reading.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, the 2 that we just read, I thought were really hard. And one of them, Thrawn Janet by Robert Louis Stevenson. This is the one we were supposed to discuss on the last episode, but Emily hadn't done her homework. It's really short, but it's written in Scots dialect, so it's so difficult. And I listened to the audio, which was really helpful. And then I did read it, but the audio, I wouldn't have been able to get through it if I hadn't listened to the audiobook first, I feel like. How about you?
Yeah. I forgot about the audio, actually. I reread it again.
Okay.
And I tried to watching Outlander helped. I have Outlander in my brain from watching that series. So that helped a little bit for some of the words. But now I'm like, oh, I need to go and listen to the story, actually.
And Amanda, one of our listeners on Goodreads, who's been faithfully reading along with us, we appreciate you, Amanda, asked if the e-copy, if you're reading the e-copy, if you click on the Scots dialect words, if it tells you what it means.
It does not.
Yeah.
No.
So she said it would be worth the price of admission if it does. Now you know, Amanda. It does not.
It does not do that. Every now and then there are footnotes that link to something, but it's usually, some kind of contextual thing. Most part, the Scots words are not represented that way. And I'm reading it on my Kobo and the paper book.
Okay. And I'm listening to the audio and reading the paper book. I also thought the story, it was quite religious in nature, which a lot of these are. And, this was published a long time ago, but the devil is represented by a black man, which I found incredibly offensive.
Yeah, the black man, he's quite the tradition. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a woman is considered to be witchy because she's a woman.
Right. And the story was published in 1887.
Yeah. So you have to, give a nod to that, of course.
Yeah. Every time I come across the quote black man, I want to research it more, but then I forget, because I do think like, wow, just people always talk about how American enslavement of people of African descent created racism. But then you have something like this black man. I don't know when that tradition started and ghost stories and the devil and things like that.
Yeah. I think it was before that. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
What I found most interesting about reading this book was actually reading more about Robert Louis Stevenson. Because I think that informs why they're writing these stories and why the editor, Michael Newton, thought that this short story was one that should be included in the collection. Robert Louis Stevenson came from a very religious family. And so this short story, in research I did, was kind of his anti-religion sentiment came into this story.
Right. Yeah. Like he had a nanny or something that was like fire and brimstone kind of nanny. She was not Mary Poppins.
Yeah.
Kind of put the fear of God in him.
Yeah. And he also died really young. He died at 44, Robert Louis Stevenson, and he was very ill and had to travel quite a bit to live in places that helped his pulmonary health.
Okay.
But this was only one of two stories that he wrote in Scots dialect. And when he wrote it, he didn't think it would be published.
Oh, interesting.
And then they published it right away.
Oh, wow.
Much to readers' discontent. I'm just kidding. It was really hard to read. But I do feel like I got the gist of the story. Do you feel like
I
you
do,
did?
yeah.
Okay.
Like I said, I did go back and read it again, which was helpful. And some of the things were funny, like there's this one scene when they're talking and one of the guys said, there were folk even then that said the Lord had left the college professors to their own devices, and the lads that went to study with them what had done mair and better sitten in a peat pog, like their forebearers of the persecution, with a Bible under their oxter and spirit of prayer in their heart. It was kind of funny, when you like relax into the story.
Right.
I guess that's my theme, relaxing into hard texts, and not trying too hard. One of the things I liked about this story, and I've been trying to pay attention to like instances of things, and somebody fell into ashes in the ground. And I thought, ooh, that is such a thing now that we associate with vampires. Really, that they burst into flame and fall into ashes when they're finally killed.
Yeah, that's what I've decided. And as we move into talking about The Open Door by Margaret Oliphant, what I've decided is when I'm reading these is where are we seeing the kernel of ghost stories that we are reading now more commonly. And that part's interesting to me. Getting through it can be hard. The Open Door was very long. The audio was 2 hours.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah. Wow. I know. When I saw that, I was like, well, surely that's a mistake. But it was. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to read it because I'm a pretty fast reader. It's 30 pages. And I read it and I got about 25 pages and I was like, I'm finishing this out with the audio because it was tough.
Yeah.
And then I re-listened to the whole thing on audio because I felt like I just didn't get it.
Okay.
I kind of was like, what's the point? Why is this story taking so long? It was slow.
Yeah, it was a slow one. It took me 2 days. I read it over 2 days. And I felt like, though, the payoff was worth it.
Okay, explain it to me, because the ending, I was like, I loved the very last sentence, which is what Amanda said. Hello, Amanda, again, on Goodreads. She said, the whole point of this book was summed up in the last sentence to me. And I agree. So let me read the last sentence.
All right. And just while she's looking for that, this story was published in magazine form in 1882. It's by Margaret Oliphant, we should say, another Scottish writer. And it came out in a book collection in 1885. And I think the 1885 edition is what we are reading in this book.
And the last sentence is, things have effects so different on the minds of different men. Mm-hmm. Which just sums it up beautifully.
It does, yeah, because this one, it's another religious ghost story, and there's a man of science involved in this. And what I enjoyed is the narrator's resistance to this man. As he says, the cold-blooded confidence of scientific men is a line that he says at one point, and just how you can't talk to them, like, because they are so firm, they are never going to change their minds. And they're cold-blooded and overconfident and everything like that. So what happens in this story, just to set it up a little bit, is a family takes a old manse for 2 years. They're renting it for 2 years, this old manse in the Scottish countryside. And on the property is the ruins of the first house on that property. And they find that no one has stayed 2 Decembers in this house.
Little warning,
right? And so little Roland, the son of the family, the only boy, so, the precious child, as opposed to the 2 daughters who make appearances here and there, instead of sending him away to school or having a tutor come at home, they sent him to a day school, and he rides the horse back and forth, and he's kind of a weakly boy, so they're hoping that riding the horse every day will buff him up a bit. And it gets cold. It's December, and he gets freaked by something. And now they think he's on his deathbed, right?
And he's hearing voices.
Right, yeah.
Which was creepy. I liked that part of the story.
Yeah.
A lot. I felt like this one had some good creep factor.
It did. It really did. And so Dad, goes, there's something
He gets
up.
summoned. He's away from home,
Yes.
and he gets summoned to come find out what the voice is.
Right. So he checks it out and gets freaked out a bit, and then goes back the next night with a doctor. And then...
Well, he goes back with someone who works for him first, right?
Is that it? I thought that was the second. Well, I don't
anyway,
remember.
It doesn't
anyway,
matter.
He goes back
several different trips.
Yeah, several different trips. And when he does go with his servant, Bagley is his name. And that was really interesting because, and I think it was in this, I wrote down this quote: "There is the thing that human nature trembles at, a creature invisible, yet with sensations, feelings, a power, something expressing itself." And so like Bagley, like he doesn't know what he's afraid of, like, and that's like the ultimate fear, right? And the narrator says to him at one point, "Shake yourself together, man." And I just thought, oh my God, like in America, we say, pull yourself together, shake yourself together, which makes sense, right? Like shake it off, right? It's kind of like a mashup between those two things. But then like one of the guys who faints, when he wakes up, the first thing he says is, "What's up?" Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh my God, that is so contemporary feeling.
Yes.
For a story that was written in the 1880s,
Yeah.
But yeah, so he goes back with these different men. And as Emily read that final quote, or the final line of the story, these different men have different experiences and see different things. And for one of the men, it's seeing something that causes him to have doubt. Right. Even though he won't really admit it.
Right. And the voice is saying, oh, mother, which is creepy.
It is creepy, And so he goes back with the man of the cloth. And we won't give the final spoiler, but what I really appreciated about this story is that it's a religious ghost story, but as opposed to the Thrawn Janet, which is about fire and the devil, this was about helping a spirit that's in pain. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah. And also the whole thing with the science versus the man of the cloth. And, it really goes to that question we've been posing to ourselves and to other people, do you believe in ghosts? And a lot of that answer to that, I think, has to do with, our past experience, our religious feelings, and what we have experienced in life.
Yeah, evidence we think we've seen.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
we think fits into whatever was going on. There's one point, too, where one of the women says to the guy, being unintentionally poetic, he says, is that people have seen the darkness moving. And I thought that was really creepy to think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, okay, this is something. So on our ghost bingo card, the Canterville Ghost by Oscar Wilde is on one of the squares. And what I thought was a good connection with that story was when the guy is talking about having rented this home and finding out that there could be a ghost. And he thought that was a distinct advantage, as it was the fashion of the times to want to have a ghost haunting.
That's so funny.
Yeah. And so keep that in mind when you read, if you read, The Canterville Ghost by Oscar Wilde.
Yes. Which we're going to be reading in the future. We'll talk about that. Well, one of the things I thought would be a good segue to talk about with this one, too, before we get into The Garden by Clare Beams, which was another buddy read we did, is that there is a lot of nature in this book and creepy parts of nature. And so I just thought I'd read this one little part. This is where they're going to find out what this sound is and learn more. This new sound came upwards from the ground, a low, moaning, wailing voice full of suffering and pain. The contrast between it and the hoot of the owl was indescribable, the one with a wholesome wildness and naturalness that hurt nobody, the other a sound that made one's blood curdle, full of human misery.
Yeah, that was a great scene.
Yeah, very good scene.
Love
And
that.
to me, the pain of getting through some of these, then when we read something like Clare Beams' book, The Garden, which is so filled with these creepy images of moving vines and veiny staircases, you can see that that's what these early ghost stories were bringing forth. Mm-hmm. And in our conversation with Clare, she talks about being at a residency for writing and reading some ghost stories to get herself in the mood to do her own writing.
Right, yeah.
Including Edith Wharton, which is towards the end of this, I believe, which I can't wait to get to.
Yeah, and we've read some of Edith Wharton's ghost stories. I don't know if we read that whole collection of her ghost stories. I don't recall now, but we read it in preparation for our drive up to the Mount up in the Berkshires in Massachusetts one year as something to talk about on the way, as if we needed something specific to talk about. But it's really cool to read stories in settings where you're going to be.
Yes. We did read some of her ghost stories, and they were really good. And we had, a 3-hour drive or 2.5-hour drive. And we talked about these ghost stories most of the way, which is the other thing that's amazing about short stories.
Yeah.
So should we talk about The Garden by Clare Beams?
Yeah. So The Garden, it came out just last year, and it was a book that came onto our radar because of us looking into ghost stories. And I'm so glad that we read this one. You know, I have to say I'm not really drawn usually to books about women and maternity issues, pregnancies at all. But I really was captivated by this. And as a woman who has never been pregnant or birthed babies, I didn't feel excluded while reading this, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I told Chris as I was reading it the whole time, I was like, what is Chris going to think of this book? Because it's also just, it's a little bit creepy the way that the pregnancies are described and handled in the novel. And pregnancy is a really interesting experience. I'm not a religious person, but I do think it's pretty miraculous that women can grow human beings. And I think it's why men are afraid of women in a lot of ways, and science is afraid of women. But that's something we talked to Clare about.
Yeah.
And this novel really speaks to that. I think we should just set it up really quickly, which is that the opening is this woman, Irene, and her husband, George, are driving through the Berkshires. It's 1948. They're arriving to this house that has been converted into a place where pregnant women can come to be treated by 2 doctors. The women have all experienced trouble either getting pregnant or really mostly staying pregnant.
Yeah.
They've had a lot of miscarriages.
The qualifications that you have to have X amount of miscarriages and things like that. So trigger warning for that.
Yeah. And Irene is arriving being pregnant for the 6th time in 2 years.
Right. And she's somebody who never apparently really wanted children. She loves her husband dearly, though. Like, he is her home. Like, I love the way Clare describes their relationship. But he's come back from the war. He fought in World War II, wanting to have a child. And, like, this is what he wants to, affirmation of life kind of thing. And so she's doing it because he really wants a child. And there's some scenes in the beginning that they're funny in a terrifying kind of way, or a mean kind of way.
Yeah. 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 And one of the reasons we didn't choose this book as a read along is because we weren't sure if it was ghosty enough. It definitely has ghost elements.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah. Oh, one of the things I was going to say too is that I think pregnancy can be such a crutch to write a horror story with, because like pregnancy is horrifying for so many different reasons. But there was nothing like cheap about this book at all. There was no easy hits that she took.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To make it be a body horror kind of tale.
There's not a lot of blood and guts and gore, but there is a lot about life and rejuvenation of life and loss of life that I thought she did beautifully.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and the story, like, part of it is dealing with the garden, and then there are these ghosts. It's in a family estate. So Dr. Bishop is the woman doctor who's married to Dr. Hall, the man doctor, and it's her family's estate. Her grandfather had built this. So there's baggage there for her.
Right. And Irene arrives and she's going to start digging it up.
Oh, yeah. Irene, and you'll hear our conversation with Clare, the author, that not everybody is exactly on team Irene, but both of us are. And I really enjoyed her because I can imagine, as somebody who never wanted to have children from my body, I can imagine what it would be like to be really in love with somebody, a man in particular, who couldn't birth a baby, who really wanted that, and loving somebody enough to do that, even though you don't really want to, and you've been going through hell with like 5 miscarriages.
And then you arrive at a place, what happens as these women arrive there is their husbands leave and they have visitations every couple of months with their husbands, and your whole life is taken over.
Yeah.
You have no autonomy really, other than the fact that you're the one that is ultimately growing this baby. But, they're forced to rest and they're forced to eat certain things and to not go out of the building. And, everything is about raising this, becoming a womb essentially. And, there's a point where Irene even says that, am I doing something that's affecting the quality of the womb?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Enhancing the maternal environment.
Right.
And there's so much too about the erasure of pregnancy, becoming a mother, the potential for dying in childbirth. So there are a lot of different layers, I think, on every aspect of this novel, from the garden to the ghosts to the medical reality of what's going on, because Clare did base this on an actual couple who were experimenting with synthetic estrogen. Right.
And we get into that with Clare, and we also talk about the continued experimentation on women's health. So we'll leave it there for you to listen to that conversation. We want to remind you that there is a Goodreads thread about this buddy read. So if you want to get in, if you read this later, if you're listening to this 2 years from now, that Goodreads thread is still going to be there. Please join the conversation there.
Yeah. Oh, such a good novel. I'm really glad that we read it. And I really want to read more from Clare.
Yeah, she has another novel that I had started as an arc a couple years ago called The Illness Lessons.
Yeah, that came out in 2020.
And she alluded to the fact that The Little Women is a connection there, the book The Little Women. For The Garden, the connection was The Secret Garden. It also definitely has a Shirley Jackson Haunting of Hill House flair. So if you read that earlier with us this year, you will see that the house in the garden is very alive, like the one in The Haunting of Hill House.
And nods towards the yellow wallpaper.
Yes.
And then she had, her first book was a collection of short stories we show what we have learned. And that one, Emily, I thought about you when I was reading about it because it has magical realism elements in it.
Yeah, I think I want to look for that because I'm also missing my short stories from last year. And the ghost stories aren't scratching that itch, unfortunately.
Yeah. I know the ghost stories are seeming more like homework, but I'm glad we're reading through this collection.
Yeah, and we appreciate those of you who are
struggling along with us.
The struggle is real. So, Chris, did you go on any Biblio adventures?
I did. I had a wonderful watching experience, and this is something that we put in the June newsletter. I watched a conversation between Carmen Maria Machado and Megan Stielstra. This was at the Newberry Library in Chicago. They're writers on writing. And I really appreciated the conversation, especially Carmen saying it takes her so long to figure out what she wants to say. Especially when it comes to like writing any kind of op-ed or essay, writers are asked sometimes to write maybe a quick editorial about something, or maybe can you write an essay for an upcoming issue of something? And she said really like she could not do the op-ed thing unless it's something she's been thinking about and working on. Then she can. She's like, otherwise the time has passed. And she said she's also committed to writing an essay for something and the deadline approaches and they're like, hey, how's it going? And she's like, yeah, I'm not going to be able to do that. And I appreciated her saying that because I think so often we have this image of writers sitting down and writing, and they're writing this essay. And, they're going to revise it and stuff. But to listen to somebody who's talking about her process and that it is a struggle to even start initially and to get something going, I really appreciated that. And I wasn't familiar with Megan Stielstra's work. I hadn't heard of her before, but I went and looked on her website, and she has some of her pieces there. I read one of her short pieces, Channel B, that I sent to Emily right away because it's about when she was a new mother and had one of those baby monitors. And, she lives in the city, and she realized that switching from one channel to another, she could see somebody else's baby. I was like, wow. I was like, okay, we got a theme about babies and stuff happening here too, It
was so well written. We'll put a link in the show notes. It's on The Rumpus, which has sunset but has been purchased by Roxane Gay, so maybe it's coming back.
Yes.
Well, I've had several little free library adventures, including when I was in Colorado. Just as we were packing to leave, we were in downtown Carbondale and stopped at my favorite little free library, and there was a copy of The God in the Woods by Liz Moore, which a lot of you have read, including Chris.
High five, man.
Loved it. It was in our listener top 10. And so, of course, I had to grab it. Jim was like, I've never seen you run so fast to a little free library and grab a book in my life. And then I got it home to Jacob's house. I was like, I cannot fit this thing in my suitcase because, of course, I had overpacked books already and had left books on his bookshelf. So it's on his bookshelf back at his house, whether I will wait till my next visit there or go to the library, which is readily available. I can do that. Chris and I were talking about the temptation is real when you see books in little free libraries.
It really is, yeah. I would loan you my copy, but it's currently on loan with somebody else. Kate actually gave me her copy and said, read this. And I read it and loaned it out to a couple different, I think it's on like the third or fourth person at work who's great. Borrowed it. Because it was, this was last summer, it was really long holds everywhere. Yeah. So when anybody saw me carrying it around, they're like, oh, is that your copy? Can I borrow it? So
maybe I shouldn't say it's readily available then. It probably is still a hold at the library.
Yeah, maybe. Well, you might have luck getting the audio or an e-copy.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe.
Yeah. And then when we got home, we did a bike ride. The gentleman caller and I did just in the Guilford area. We did like a 20-mile bike ride. And the way he gets me to do those happily is we have a slew of little free libraries we check along the way. So that was really a fun welcome home. And I'd forgotten to put the panniers on the back of my bike because usually I have books and I drop them as I go.
Nice.
But now I have looked at the ones and know which ones need refills. So that'll be my next bike ride.
Excellent. Well, my other Biblio adventure is I did watch the 1997 miniseries of The Shining, and I enjoyed it. It's a much more faithful adaptation of the novel. Stephen King did indeed write the screenplay for this. And, overall, like comparing it to the 1980 movie by Kubrick, I felt like this adaptation, the characters seemed more like real people. They seemed like people with issues, but they were working on them. Whereas Kubrick's family, they all seemed already kind of like on the edge way too much. And I think the thing about The Shining, the novel, is that it is about a husband, a wife, and their child, which is interesting too, because I usually don't like reading books about kids either, but like here I am, right? And I never really thought about The Shining as a book about a kid, but really Danny is the child and he has The Shining. He has these special powers to see things and see the future and whatnot. So he triggers a lot of things at the hotel. So yeah, I was thinking about Kubrick's film and I thought, compared to this, Kubrick's film almost looks like a farce of a horror movie at this point to me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing, though, about these serialized television shows is they have more hours to tell the story.
They do. Like, this was over 3 different nights that they aired it, I guess. And it's not considered one of the better miniseries that he's done. He's done a bunch of them and kind of ruled the networks in the 90s. And I could see, like, there were times when I felt like, okay, let's pick it up a little bit. So I think you could have cut some things. But the development of the downfall is much more understandable.
Yeah, character development. Sounds like. I mean, I think there are some books that maybe aren't meant to be made into the visual form. Would you say that now, having watched these 2 different ones? That you think it's just a better book than...
Well, yeah, I think the book is the best out of these 3 things. And then I'm not saying I'm recommending the miniseries or the movie, but if you're a Stephen King fan and you enjoy The Shining, you'll probably want to watch them. Okay. I had to rent it on Apple TV and watched it that way. I'm really happy I did, and I wanted to watch it soon after having reread the novel. Yeah. And it was so 90s, like the guy who plays Jack, the father. I'm so awful with actor names, but he played in that sitcom Wings. Do you remember Wings with the 2 brothers who flew? Yeah. So he plays Jack Torrance, and then Wendy is played by the woman who got her big break in Risky Business. He played Tom Cruise's love interest. Because I was like, where do I know her from? Like, she looks so familiar, and hence That's so yeah. And there are some other well-known people in that, like Elliot Gould. And I gotta say, The Shining, the movie, one of the characters who dies shouldn't have died, according to the sequel to The Shining, Dr. Sleep. And in Shining, the miniseries, he does not die. So that was an important distinction. Yeah. Yeah. And I did read Dr. Sleep when it came out. I haven't watched the adaptation of that yet.
Well, we know what's next.
Well, I don't know.
No?
I don't know. Dr. Sleep was okay, but it didn't really get my engines going all that much. So,
well, we only want you to do things that get your engines going.
So I think that this wraps up Chris's summer of The Shining.
Yeah, it was Moby Dick last summer. Now it's The Shining this summer. Way to go. I just wanted to quickly recap the 2 writing workshops that I did because I never talked about them. I did them before I went on my trip to Colorado. So the first one was with Betsy Lerner, who recently wrote the novel The Shred Sisters. She also has written many memoirs. The most recent is The Bridge Ladies. And this was an in-person seminar at a local library here in the Guilford area. And unbeknownst to me, it was a group that is a writing group that meets, I'm not sure how often. And they had invited Betsy Lerner to come and do this seminar with them. And then they, for reasons that are slightly unclear to me, offered it to other people who could sign up. And I was on the waiting list and got a call like the week before saying, "You're in, send your piece." And I was like, send my piece? I thought it was just Betsy talking to people. I didn't realize it was a participatory situation. So I took a piece that I had written years ago and submitted it. And the point of this was mostly focused on first sentences and titles. So everything was submitted anonymously. We all got the pieces, and I think there were 18 of us, about a week before. So I got in just under the deadline. And then there was a list of titles. So the titles weren't attached to the pieces, which was, I found that part very fun to try to match the titles to the pieces. And I will say that Betsy Lerner came in, I ended up sitting right next to her, and I could see that she had edited each of these pieces. We were to cut them off at 250 words, which was just about a page, and made lots of suggestions. When she sat down, she said, this is how this is going to go. We're going to talk about each of these pieces, but the person who wrote them is not allowed to speak, because if you do, I find that all you will do is defend your piece and what people are saying. When everyone is done commenting, then you can pipe in if you have something you want to say, or at least raise your hand and say, this is my piece. So it went really well. The one thing that didn't go well in my mind is that the beginning pieces were being talked about too long, because it was a 3-hour seminar, which seems like a lot of time, but quickly ran out. So if I were to do it again, I would say we have to set a clock and each person gets 10 minutes or whatever. And then also, we never got really to the titles. I would always pipe up at the end like, what was your title? Because I wanted to know. It was like a little game for me. Mm-hmm. But she never got to the point of talking about how you can make your titles do some work for your piece or make sense. I did learn a lot about first sentences. She is a well-known editor, and now she's actually an agent, so she plays lots of roles. She still edits Patti Smith and some other people. But she talked about how she's seen so much and read so much, as have a lot of us who are heavy readers. And if you don't catch me in the first sentence, I'm not going to keep reading. So I've been thinking about that so much as I read books now since that seminar. And then we didn't really talk about titles, which is a great segue to Shuli Kaywood, who does actually have a seminar that she does, or I think she calls them workshops, about having your titles do some heavy lifting in your work, which is really interesting. And I did a list essay workshop with Shuli. One of our listeners, hey Anne, was also on the call, which was really fun. Shuli does most of her workshops through Zoom, so you can participate no matter where you are. We'll put a link in the show notes, shulikaywood.com, so you can see her upcoming workshops. List essays can be in many different forms. And what Shuli did weeks before we met was to send out 4 different examples that were completely different. And so we talked through each of the essays and how they built them from a list. And then there was a generative time where we as a group came up with a list of ideas of what you could make a list of, and then did some generative time where you actually did some writing and then came back together and talked about the experience. I'm learning that I'm not great at generative stuff on demand. I find it kind of distracting to still be on Zoom, and my brain just can't go from analyzing pieces necessarily to writing, which could just take practice, or it could be that I'm just not good at that. So it was really fun. I highly recommend it. And this particular one was recorded only for people who did participate. So if you are someone who thinks like, ooh, I don't know about those, I can't absorb everything, this was one where you got a link then and could watch it again if you wanted to.
That's cool. That's very helpful.
Yeah. Or reference something if you didn't remember. So a lot of fun. Really 2 good times spent with writing.
Nice.
Do you have any upcoming jaunts on the books?
Well, as soon as we stop recording here today, both of us are heading over to the New Haven Public Library for the launch of their New Haven Memory Lab. The New Haven Memory Lab is a partnership between the New Haven Free Public Library and the Beinecke Rare Books and Manuscript New Haven Community Archive Support Program. They're really trying to get the New Haven community historians and history-minded folks together to help create more of a knowledge base of New Haven history. This is a joint venture between the New Haven Public Library and the Beinecke, setting up an area and providing equipment for people to bring their family records and digitize them. So I'm looking forward to learning more about the details of how they're going to work this and to see what tools they're using.
Yeah, I'm really excited, and thank you for the invite. I didn't know anything about it. I just wanted to let people know that I am kicking off the reading of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I'm hoping to have this read. I'm planning to have it read by the next episode, which drops at the end of July. And Companion E, just like Chris just did with The Shining, I've decided I'm going to watch the 1940 version of the movie, which was an Academy Award winner and was directed by Alfred Hitchcock.
Yeah, it's a good one. I remember catching that when I was a kid, like one rainy weekend day, and I watched it. It totally captured me. And I didn't even know back then it was based on a book.
So cool. But you've read Rebecca,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if anyone's interested in joining me, I really appreciate people who've been piping in on the Goodreads thread. I have a great copy of the book, but I've also decided, based on comments people made on Goodreads, to listen to the audiobook narrated by Alexandra Okarma. Some people said that there was a long wait for that in their library. I was able to get it right away from Hoopla. I don't think it was available on the Libby app, but on the Hoopla app it was available. So you might check that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. What about upcoming reads?
Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier is definitely going to be one of my first. I also have the audiobook How to Say Babylon by Sophia Sinclair. I've been having a real memoir moment, and that's a memoir that when it came out, I really wanted to read, and I've heard the audio is really good on that. She narrates. And then I also have Nanaville by Anna Quinlan. She's one of my favorite authors. I've talked about her. This is about her adventures in grandparenting. It came out in 2019, and as much as I like her, I was like, oh, I'm not a grandparent. Well, now I am 2 times over. So I thought I would give it a read. It's a very short little book, and it's more essays, I think, in design. It's got a really cute little kid handprint on the front. And then I also have a book that was recommended to us by Sue Jackson, who is the person who is our Big Book Summer Reading Challenge host.
Yeah, she sent us a lovely email. You want me to read it? Okay, she says, always enjoy hearing what you two are up to. Just to note that one of the books inspired by the yellow wallpaper is a middle grade novel published last year by the great Anne Ursu, Not Quite a Ghost, an outstanding novel, both a ghosty story and an excellent portrayal of the chronic immune disorder that Anne and I share, ME/CFS. Really great novel and a perfect companion read for the yellow wallpaper. And shout out to Sue. Sue's also an author. She's written a book about living with chronic illness. And we'll put a link to her book in the show notes as well.
Yeah, and I got a copy of this. It was readily available in our library system. It's for ages 8 through 12. And the very front flap, it says it's a dark, deeply felt story of the ghosts that lurk just beyond our sight, as well as the ones we carry with us.
That cover is so cool.
It's really cool. Yeah. So I'm going to be reading this as well.
Nice. Well, that's interesting because one of my upcoming reads is Dracula's Brunch Club. And this is also a book for a younger crowd, grades 5 to 7. You know, I love vampire stories, but I've decided to kind of maybe challenge myself to read vampire stories that have Dracula in it in some form, you know, just to kind of narrow things down a little bit and help me narrow things down, right? But I thought I'd read you this description because it might be a Dracula book that you can handle, Emily. When Count Dracula returns to Transylvania after a 6-month world tour, he finds that everything has changed. All the progress he made in building trust and connection between humans and vampires have been undone. The blood orange jelly and even the blood oranges themselves have vanished. Strange new vampires appear, and everyone seems to be turning against Count Dracula. He must not only set things right, but also unravel the mystery behind these strange events. The story strikes a perfect balance between humor and suspense. Its silliness will have young readers laughing, while the unfolding mystery will keep them eagerly turning pages. The artwork features dark tones that evoke the classic gloom of vampire tales, but it avoids becoming too intense for young readers. Pops of color, pink donuts and fuzzy slippers, and of course red blood, add charm and contrast, completing the cartoon style. So this is a young reader's graphic novel, and what I just read was actually from the school library journal. So if you have a young reader in your life, this might be up their alley. I'll report back on it. This book comes out in August 2025. So thank you to Edelweiss for the advanced reader copy on this.
It's going to be interesting to see if something that's not as gory is as appealing to you. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't really always like the gore. You know, it's not the gore that appeals to me. And like the actual novel, Bram Stoker's, There's not a ton of gore in that. It's more about the chase and people working together. I mean, and I always sympathize with Dracula.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting since it's for young adults if they are building empathy through the story.
Yeah, so more to come on that.
So coming up next, enjoy our conversation with Clare Beams, author of The Garden. Happy reading!
We're excited to be here today with author Clare Beams. We just buddy read her latest novel, The Garden, for our year of reading ghost stories and cannot wait to dig into it with her. Clare's first book, We Show What We Have Learned, is a collection of short stories that won the Bard Fiction Award and was a finalist for many other awards, including the Shirley Jackson Best Collection Award. Her first novel, Illness Lessons, was set in 19th century Massachusetts and was about an illness affecting a girls' school. A reviewer at the Washington Post described it as, quote, Louisa May Alcott meets Shirley Jackson with a splash of Margaret Atwood, end quote. Clare's style has been likened to Willa Cather, Carson McCullers, Eudora Welty, and Stephen King. And if you'll allow us to drop one more name, Joyce Carol Oates has called Clare a, quote, female/feminist voice for the 21st century, end quote. Welcome, Clare.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Clare, we're so excited to be talking about The Garden today. As Chris mentioned in the intro, we're talking about ghost stories this year. Mm-hmm. And this one definitely has some ghosty elements.
Sure does.
So we thought we'd start by asking you to just give a quick synopsis of what the book's about and maybe what the genesis behind the story is.
Sure. So the book is set in the late 1940s at an isolated country house turned hospital in the Berkshires, where a husband and wife doctor team is trying out an experimental new cure for miscarriage. The protagonist, whose name is Irene, is their most difficult, prickliest patient, and she's come to this hospital pregnant and desperate to stay that way. But also she's not a joiner and she's not a rule follower by nature. And so she's not happy to be in this place. So in the process of sort of going about the doctor's regimen and doing her best to follow the doctor's rules without really fully committing herself internally to their project, she also discovers this mysterious walled, abandoned garden on the grounds of the house hospital where things may or may not come back to life. As the doctor's plans kind of go a little bit off the rails, she has to decide what she does or doesn't want to do with this garden, with this new band of friends that she's made at the hospital, kind of in spite of herself.
That's a great description.
It is. It really is. It was a page turner for me.
Oh, thank you.
A button clicker, because I read it on my e-reader, I suppose. But I couldn't wait to get back to it every time I had reading time. The way you describe these two things, so there's Irene and the garden and the doctors. When I was looking at my highlights for the book, I was so focused on certain aspects of it, like the patriarchal, misogynist aspects of it. But then there's the garden aspect and possible hauntings and things. And they seem separate in my mind sometimes, but you wove them together so amazingly that I never felt jarred. Or I felt like, oh, okay, here we're back there. So we're wondering, like, how did you write this novel? Like from what sparked it? And then, like, how did you manage to weave all of this together? So it seems effortless. We know it's not.
Thank you. So the first seed of the novel actually came when I was, for my previous novel, The Illness Lesson. It had sold simultaneously in the US and the UK. And my UK publishing house was not a fan of the title, The Illness Lesson. They had recently published a book, I think, about chronic fatigue syndrome, and they were concerned that it hadn't sold that well. So they were wanting me to find alternate titles. And so I was sort of scouring strange medical corners of the internet, like medical histories, especially sort of related to women's medicine. And I came across a reference to a drug that was really the wrong era for the illness lesson, but that still just like snagged in my brain in this way that often means I'm going to have to write about something. And it was a drug called DES, or diethylstilbestrol. I had never heard of it before, and it has this kind of horrifying, kind of mind-boggling history, actually, where in real life, So it's basically a very high dose of an artificial estrogen. And it was pioneered by a real wife, husband and wife researcher team that had decided they had dedicated their lives to studying women's hormones and kind of what happens around the time of miscarriage. And they'd noted this swinging that can happen around that time. And so they thought, well, if we can give this high dose of this artificial estrogen, maybe we can kind of even women out and maybe everything will be better. As it turns out, that was a very dangerous idea. And this drug was prescribed in this country for decades, from the late 40s through the early 1970s, actually, sometimes to women who'd experienced repeated miscarriage, but sometimes just prophylactically. And it turned out to cause some really pretty horrifying side effects, especially in the female babies of the women who had taken the drug. So it turns out that kind of evening women out, as is often the case, was a dangerous idea. And so I think a few things about the story kind of caught me. First of all, this idea of like stabilizing women, which I often think is sort of a danger sign that we're heading somewhere scary. And second, just this question of why the drug was prescribed for so very long. And DES is sometimes referred to as the silent thalidomide. So thalidomide being the drug that was prescribed mostly in Europe to combat morning sickness and cause these really horrifying, very visual birth defects, often affecting limbs of the babies whose mothers had taken the drug. But in the case of DES, the side effects were mostly confined to sort of the reproductive organs of the girl babies who were born to these women. And so they often weren't noted until those children reached puberty themselves. But still, I was like, we went years past that first generation of girl babies, kind of first demonstrating these effects. And I think I've often been fascinated by kind of the silence that I think still persists around women's bodies, and just this weird combination of squeamishness and an idea about sacredness that kind of stops us from looking too closely at what's going on with women, I think. And in that darkness, I think a lot of scary things can grow. As I often do in fiction, I took that small seed of reality and then kind of grew it in my own fictional direction. And I turned the idea of this drug into a whole pregnancy regime that would be designed to stabilize problematic women. And I invented this fictional isolated hospital. Nothing like that existed in real life. It was just these doctors and researchers kind of wove the drug into their own existing practices. And I sort of thought, well, what if we put it all over here in this isolated place, and what further kind of strangenesses could I grow?
Right. Yeah. The Berkshires,
yes.
It has such a tradition of being the creepy, weird place in American literature.
Yes. And there are all these great houses that were built there in the Gilded Age that were sort of too big for the isolated places where they'd put them. And so a lot of them like burned down or were kind of abandoned. Like they proved to be kind of unheatable and unmaintainable in these places. And so I was interested in that too, because these were often houses that were built using architectural styles that are meant to pretend they're from like the 1500s, which of course, they're not. They're from sort of Gilded Age America. And I wanted this idea of this house that was meant to be an almost like patriarchal display and what might happen in this garden that is its own exception to the rules. And I was very inspired, of course, by The Secret Garden there too, which was a book I had really loved as a kid and then reread as an adult and still loved, but there is some creepy stuff in there. There's a kind of Christian science-y, like, think healthy and you'll be healthy kind of messaging that I thought was very interesting to borrow for a book about pregnancy.
Yes.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting when you read a book from your youth as an adult? Yeah. So different.
Same thing with Little Women with the illness lesson. And again, I still love both of those books. But yeah, with Little Women, I think there's a lot about the way the father is controlling that family that's very interesting to note when you reread it. And yeah, the Secret Garden, just when you reread it, the protagonist, Mary, she's kind of this awful person on page one, and she looks terrible. She's all like pinched and sort of her coloring is terrible. Then she starts frolicking around on the moors and like reforming her spirit. And suddenly she's like a really beautiful little girl. And there's a whole secret child in that book who like learns to walk essentially through like reforming his personality. It's really something.
You said the words patriarchal display. And I love that. Mm-hmm. And we'll get into that more.
We can get into that. I was going to ask just a follow-on question about, we asked you one of those, easy, facetiously questions about like, how did you write this book? So let's ask a more specific question, because I thought it was really fascinating how you titled the parts of the book.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you've got mouse and you've got moth and snake. And I would imagine that if you are a woman who's had several miscarriages, there's a particular distancing you might do from the baby that you're carrying because you don't know what's going to happen. You've experienced some pretty awful stuff to date.
Right.
Was that part of the idea behind how you titled those parts, or was there something else behind that?
I really love that. I think that was definitely in there. I mean, I think when Irene arrives at this house, she's such a tricky character. I love her so much, and she's very divisive, it has turned out. Some people just cannot stand her. And to me, all of her anger makes sense. I think she is someone who, her husband is sort of her one softness. She loves him so much, and he's come back from this terrible war that she can't understand, wanting one thing from her, which is these children that will sort of serve to anchor him back in his life. And she can't make her body behave. And so she is so reluctant to let herself attach, I think. I think that is right. I also think I was very inspired by, and most people who have had children kind of in the era that I've had children have experience with these various websites where they'll tell you how your baby is growing, and they do it in terms of pieces of fruit. Mm-hmm. So, my baby's the size of a cherry, and like my baby's the size of a cantaloupe. Like you kind of track through. And I just, even at the time, I was like, this is sort of weird. This idea that like the only way we can understand what's happening is sort of in terms of these images that are not really related to babies. And so I think I wanted to take that and once again sort of make it stranger and creepier in terms of, I really wanted to kind of emphasize this mingled inward and outward haunting that I think Irene begins to experience, where she is seeing these visions, these flickers of visions, but she's also kind of experiencing them as something that's inside her.
Yeah, the sensory experience of it all. And what happens when they're basically given the rest cure,
yes, exactly.
From like the 19th century where it's kind of like complete isolation and the curtains are always closed and they're supposed to be resting and laying down quite a big part of the day.
Right.
And like what happens to people's minds when that happens. And I kind of had this feeling that like Irene, I love Irene.
Oh, thank you.
On Camp Irene
I'm in that
here.
camp too.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just loved her. I didn't love her anger, like her rage. I could feel it, and just how torn she was about so many things. And her relationship with her husband was really beautiful. And she makes the point of she didn't marry him just to marry him because everybody else is getting married. Like he was her true home.
Yes.
And so you explore in some ways like the different reasons women are having these babies. You mentioned it's post-war. So many of these men are coming back from the war wanting to have babies. It's that social pressure time too, right? Like mid-century, we're going to make housewives. The women are going back into the home kind of thing.
Yep.
I'm curious, like what kind of historical research you did about that time period, if any.
Yeah. I think I've always been sort of interested in that question, this sort of baby boom that was, all these people he'd either entered into marriages kind of right before the war and then sent these husbands off and then they return. And I'm sure were quite different, and this is not an era of a lot of like great therapy, really, for anybody. Or, people came back from the war and then just wanted to get married and kind of put down these sort of domestic, safe feeling roots. Both of my parents are sort of like late baby boom babies. And I remember finding my paternal grandfather had been in the airborne and he had brought his parachute home. And he at one point had been really interested in my grandmother wearing a wedding dress made out of this parachute, which was an idea that I actually borrowed for a short story in my story collection. Because I think, all the symbolism of marriage is so interesting anyway. And these veils you wear, like these ways we put symbols on the bride and kind of who the bride actually is stops mattering so much. And I thought, what a weird take on that to have like, here's this thing that carried me through a war and let me drape you in it and then marry you. And so I just think that there's so much that, and both my grandfathers were in the war in sort of different ways. And really like no one wanted to talk about it ever. It was sort of understood that it was like, this was a thing that had happened and we're just going to leave it alone because it's very awful, and we're just going to kind of not ask any questions. And so I've often thought about what it must have been like to try to kind of build a life in that sort of way and sort of enter into this attempt to have all these children, which even in the best of circumstances is somewhat stressful, undertaking. And then what if something in that process sort of isn't working the way that it is supposed to be? So I ended up doing a fair bit of research to understand the story of this drug that was sort of just the seed for what I was going to be doing, but also to look into sort of what obstetrics looked like generally at that time. I did end up reading up on the rest cure and reread The Yellow Wallpaper, which is quite a haunting kind of imagining of what might happen to a mind when it's cut off in that way, right? And sort of just devoted to these physical processes that really are not under the mind's control. And of course, in that long short story, the woman has had a baby already and is sort of too nervous. And so the baby's kind of been taken and she's meant to just stay in this room and rest while her physician husband sort of oversees her care, and it goes not well. And of course, in Frances Hodgson Burnett's defense, the author of The Secret Garden, she was sort of writing against the rest cure in lots of ways. She thought part of the sort of like creepy, like go run on the moors and you'll be cured idea was like perhaps shutting people up in bedrooms and making them lie down in the dark all the time is not so healthy. So anyway, so I just sort of looking into the ideas that we had about the body kind of at around that time was really interesting. The way that I research it has a lot to do with the way I write in general. I don't really research ahead of time too much unless I just can't help it. I try to do the researching and the writing kind of in tandem. So I'll make myself little placeholders, or, I'll find out just enough to kind of keep going. Because I have found I love reading old, weird historical books, but I have found that it's so much easier to do that than to write that I will research for just years. And then you end up with all of this like kind of inanimate material that you still have to figure out how to mobilize in fiction. And so I just have found that it becomes like a creative way of procrastinating for me.
There's definitely Yellow Wallpaper vibes in this.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
our third quarter read along includes a companion read of The Yellow Wallpaper.
Oh,
So,
cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that'll be great.
Yeah.
It's wonderful,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, it's a revisit for both of us.
Yeah.
So it'll be nice.
Good.
Yeah.
Nice.
So let's talk about patriarchy. Let's talk about men. Let's talk about the creepy grandpa.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, what was going on there with the grandpa and the father?
Yes. So what I think is going on, well, so I will detour back a minute to say, and you had asked me sort of how this book came to be written, and the answer to that is in a lot of trial and error. I am someone who does not really plan out where I'm going before I go there, because as a younger writer, I did that and I kind of flattened and controlled all the life out of everything. Mm. And so it's important that I be kind of discovering things as I go. As a result, though, I make many wrong turns. And there was a draft of The Garden, actually, when I submitted it to my editor. It was in 2 points of view. It was almost equally divided between Irene and Dr. Bishop, the female doctor.
Interesting.
And so the grandfather really came to be through my attempt to understand who this woman doctor was, because it was important to me. She is really the antagonist of the book in many ways, and she is making these women do something that is not ultimately good for them. But she has kind of, at least at the beginning, she has very noble intentions, right? And she also really wants a bigger life for herself than what has been offered to her. And so for me to understand her, I had to sort of understand the forces that she was operating against, which is where the grandfather came in. And then once I realized, and actually, I think I would have realized this on my own, but my agent and editor, so I submitted this draft and then they talked to each other before they talked to me, which is never a great sign. They were basically like, you're writing a ghost story and you're de-haunting it every time you're in Dr. Bishop's head, because you're sort of showing us what's behind the curtain and you're kind of explaining everything. I did have this impulse every time I was in her mind to be reaching way back into backstory all the time, which is usually kind of a warning sign for me that I'm not actually writing where the story is. But once I lost her, I still wanted this grandfather to be very much a part of sort of the fabric of this place. And while I think Dr. Bishop is the antagonist, I don't think she's the villain. And I think that the grandfather really, and the grandfather sort of a symbol of patriarchy, is kind of the villain to the extent that there is one. So it was important that he still have some life beyond life on the page.
Yeah. And the father too, who, I mean, one of the lines is something like that. The father sells little Dr. Bishop to the grandfather for something that he wanted.
Exactly.
And it's like a lot of that family tradition and how harmful it is to everyone
Right,
Yeah.
right, exactly. And I think a tradition really that didn't have a space for Dr. Bishop that fitted who she actually was. Yeah. Which I think is very true of Irene too in different ways. It's just that she has sort of found this sort of, as you said, home with George that is kind of maybe almost enough for her at certain points.
Yeah.
You know.
Now, is that why they both kind of look similar to one another? Okay.
Yes. So,
right.
And I had already kind of discovered that when their point of view was when I had both of their points of view. But once I realized I was taking Dr. Bishop out, I still wanted this sense of like a sort of weird psychic pipeline between the two of them. Because I think while they're opposed to each other, they're very similar in certain ways. And so I sort of wanted their appearance to kind of echo that. There's also a trope in horror movies and horror stories of twins being creepy. And so I wanted this kind of like almost mystifying kind of resemblance that would have to do with the way they look, but also with sort of certain elements of who they are.
And then the garden.
Yeah.
That's the title of the story. The very first sentence of the novel, let's just read that very quickly. The house held still, and behind it the garden rested, brown, turning green. Man. Like, talk about, I know, page turner. I was on an airplane for a lot of it, and then, had to get off the plane and visit people, which was a bit of a drag.
I know. So annoying when you arrive at your
Yes. But so, I mean, some of the scenes, I remember texting Chris and saying, like, she makes vines creepy. Like,
Thank you.
the staircase of the house is veiny. It's like there's so much creep factor. Talk to us about how you populated the novel with that.
Yeah. So it's funny. I think all writers have places where the spark of their work lives. And, for some writers, it's dialogue. For some, it's character. I love describing things. Like if people would let me write whole books full of just describing things, I would so happily do it. Like really where things start for me is often with an image that I'm like excited about trying to make move. It turns out that those long pages of description are sort of more interesting to me than anyone else. So you have to figure out how to kind of like tie them to character. But here I was really interested again in this idea of like a haunting that would be outside the body, but also kind of inside the body and also kind of messing with where bodies begin and end too. So I wanted to kind of play with physical ties between, say, the house or the garden and more kind of human body type imagery. And the garden was so much fun to describe. I had a note from my editor early on that she wanted like more creepy garden description. And that was like my like treat week that I gave myself where I just got to go back in and make sure every time we entered, it was like differently creepy. And we could look at like different things. I visited some gardens in different seasons and kind of like took notes on the weird veins and, the veiny like vines that are kind of twining everywhere. So I think that the garden is really a place where the grandfather, again, has tried to control things, right? He's put walls around this garden. He wants it to be a sort of display. But I saw it as a place where control is kind of like revolting against him, right? It's kind of, life is kind of taking back its territory. And so by like compressing everything in such a way, he sort of made everything weird in there, right? like nature is kind of reshaping itself and reasserting itself in all these ways that are never quite explained, as I think so many of the sort of giant questions in life are never explained. And certainly so much of the experience of pregnancy is never explained. I mean, I'm a person who runs on the anxious side. And in pregnancy, I remember having so many questions and asking my doctors things, and they'd be like, oh yeah, we're not really sure, what that weird little thing we found on that scan means. It could mean XYZ thing. It could mean absolutely nothing. And I had one male doctor who was like, don't worry, nature knows what it's doing. And I was like, ooh, I do not feel comforted. Dying is very natural.
Right? Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, and that's one of Irene's moments of rage too, is when she's mad at Dr. Bishop saying, like, you say that if we just do everything that you're telling us to, it's going to be okay. Right. Like if we just follow the rules, basically, everything is going to be okay. And that's the great patriarchal lie that's told to women about everything. If you just do this, you're going to be okay.
Want to deal with your question.
Right. Or say, or don't even ask. Yeah. I mean, that's more, or like go sit up in your room and be quiet and, follow
and just
the
stay
rules.
calm.
Yeah.
If you don't stay calm, you're going to do a lot of damage.
Right.
And just be calm because I'm telling you to be calm.
Right.
I feel like for many of us, it's not that calming. But yeah, and I think that goes back to sort of one of the seeds for the novel in general. It's just, I think it's so interesting why we know so little about women's bodies still. They're still so, and part of it's that pregnant women don't volunteer for studies. But I think part of it does have to do with this, like, just reluctance to look too closely, and certainly to then give the women themselves information. I think we're still seeing, our lawmakers' words that they use to refer to women's bodies are in so many ways wildly inaccurate. And, and we see that, the legal ramifications of that are pretty scary a lot of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're cutting funding for women's research. Yeah. Scary times always, it seems, for women. And then, regarding pregnancy and miscarriages too, just when you start talking with women about it, it's amazing how many women have the experience of miscarriages and, just that desperation to have a child that a lot of women feel with their partner for a variety of reasons. And I think that, as somebody who doesn't have kids, I haven't been pregnant, I still felt that desperation and the longing.
Yes.
And how easy that could be preyed upon.
Exactly. And preyed upon almost even by yourself in some ways, that it becomes this goal that is sort of overtakes everything. And I think what was so interesting to me too was that I think being pregnant, I was someone who had lived like sort of from the neck up for a lot of my life, and not like super aware of my body all the time. And I just think it was so weird to be in this situation where I wanted this one thing more than anything else, but all the skills that I had sort of spent a lot of years developing in other areas of my life counted for nothing to sort of make this happen. That it was just such a clear experience of being a mammal, and that it all was sort of, it's like right at the core of yourself, and yet you have no control over it at all. So that made me, I think, a little bonkers.
Yeah, well, and so many mammals have little to no intervention. And in our country in particular, in the United States, there's so much intervention. Yes. So that's one thing that was really interesting about this novel, I feel like. And I think it's interesting, and I know you're an author, so we don't want you to have to talk about something that you don't feel qualified to talk about. Like, we know you're not a doctor, but I think it's interesting that now there's this huge movement for estrogen therapy for women, and there's been history of it over and over again in pregnancy and not even in pregnancy, just during menopause. So here we are again in a minefield of lack of understanding of women's bodies.
Well, and that's what's so interesting. I mean, because I asked, I'm 42, I'm going to be 43. So, and I have friends who are sort of, like about 10, 5 to 10 years older than me who are kind of wrestling with this question right now. And so I asked at my last OBGYN just annual appointment, what is the current thinking on hormone therapy? And it was essentially like now we're thinking it's sort of a toss-up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Like, what am I? And I love my doctor, she's great, but it feels like, I grew up in the era of like when my mom was sort of hitting menopause, it was very much like, don't do any sort of hormone therapy because we've found that it sort of causes these scary things. And now it's like, maybe it's better for other things and worse for, it just is, it's difficult to know how we're supposed to make these choices.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And I am, a person who's generally pretty, I was pretty clear that I wanted to have both my kids in a hospital. I come from my grandfather was an OBGYN, my brother and sister-in-law are both doctors. I'm very pro medicine and pro science. But I do think these systems in which we give up authority to other structures are really interesting. And of course, the patriarchy is one. I do think our medical system is another, where, time and time again, you're sort of told, don't ask too many questions because the doctors know best. And, most of the time they really do. And the doctors in my own family are wonderful. But I think the times when that question has been used to sort of avert looking too closely at things have sometimes caused some really terrible effects, as with the drug that sort of was the seed for me, for this. Yeah.
Wow. And just you talk about how an origin story can block your current view.
Yeah.
Or disallow you from seeing other things, and I think sometimes even just like what you're saying with medicine, sometimes women might discount their own experience by saying, oh, this is probably, quote, natural,
Right.
I won't say anything. I won't ask those questions.
Right. And you don't want to be worried. I mean, I think part of what grabbed me about this drug too is that if someone had, I think I was such an anxious pregnant person that if someone had been like, here's a drug you can take sort of just in case to like just be extra sure that you won't, have these problems, I'm sure I would have snapped that up, and so that's a sort of scary and very moving thing. And I've met, as I've been doing book club events and things, I have met several women whose mothers took DES while pregnant with them. And some of them had effects and some of them didn't. But it's so interesting how it was not an unusual thing for women to take the drug. And yet I feel like we don't really talk about it that much,
Right.
Yeah. A lot of mystery.
And who even has the records going back that far? Some, like my mom, she's 85, like she had estrogen, but does she know what it was?
Right.
So there's so many unknowns.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. But to ask a specific question.
Sure.
Do the names of the characters have any meaning?
That's interesting.
Because all of the characters, but there's one like peripheral character named Willa Cobb.
Yes.
Which I just like, is that a joke name or kind of like, because I thought like Willa Corn Cob, Willa Cather. I don't know.
I mean, I usually name my characters kind of instinctively. So there's like a sound I want for each of them. With the main characters, I often end up, really with everybody, at some point I end up kind of like double checking what the meanings of the names are and just making sure I'm not like accidentally naming them after someone that's like a terrible parallel for. So I think that one was probably one I just sort of did by sound, but I think I did like the kind of, I know what you mean about the sound of it. Yeah. And Irene, I think when I looked it up, I think there's a component of bitterness to her name that I think, and I also just, she just felt like an Irene to me from sort of the beginning. But so I often name characters kind of at first is just an impulse. And then I have to make sure, like, have I used this name somewhere else? And then you can go on babynames.com and do some sleuthing about what the roots are and the origins and the meanings. And then you also want to make sure you're not giving them a name that like definitely would not have been given in that era. I mean, there's a lot of.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Cause there's also a Margaret and a Pearl.
Yes. And Pearl had a different name in early drafts. She was Sarah. And my editor was like, I cannot keep these characters straight. Like she's like, somehow those two names feel very similar to me and I keep confusing them. She's like, can you make one of them different? And so I renamed Pearl. And I think she's better as a Pearl.
I love Pearl. Yeah. That's a great name. I was going to just, kind of drop that to my kids. Like, if you have any more kids, this is a really good name.
Yeah, it is.
It's a lovely name.
It's very cool.
Let's talk about what ghost stories have inspired you.
So like after I'd talked to my agent and editor and done the rewrite of like basically recasting the whole book in Irene's perspective, it was already becoming much more haunted. But then I ended up with this. It's the only residency I've ever done, actually. I mean, I've done other like summer workshops and things, but the residencies where you go and you have a cabin and they bring you your lunch in a basket. And I was at McDowell for 2 weeks. And a lot of my project while I was there was just to like make things extra like scarier, more haunted. And so I reread the ghost stories of Edith Wharton, and I was trying to kind of like track where the beats were, because there's a certain kind of formula to a ghost story where there's often like 3 appearances of the spirit, and then on the third one something shifts, and either your protagonist is dead or is like joined the spirit realm or something else. And just kind of like the physical ways things were described. I also reread The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, who I love, love, love. And that novel was so inspiring on the level of the inward and outward haunting that I keep talking about, where, really the haunting that happens in that novel can only be as terrible as it is for Eleanor. I mean, that house is evil, and it's evil for everyone, and no one has a good time there. But she is so susceptible because of what she brings to the house. And so the ways in which like the inner sort of psychic landscape of a character and the actual like haunted space can interact were really interesting to kind of revisit. It was very fun to be like, in the middle of the woods in this tiny cabin, like reading all these ghost stories.
I was going to ask you, I thought it was that was in the woods, McDowell. Wow.
Yeah, it is. And I also reread The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters, which I think is such a great novel too. And again, very much about like, what do we bring to the ghost story, what does the protagonist carry to the haunting? Yeah.
Oh, so did you creep yourself out, and do you believe in ghosts?
Oh, that's interesting. I did creep myself out. I love being creeped out in that kind of way. I do not love horror movies, like, because I don't love jump scares. Like, I don't think, again, as like a somewhat anxious person, I don't love that feeling of being like really tense, but I love a good, like, slow haunting. I think that's very fun. So I was creeped out, but in mostly, I think there was one night where I was like, I think I might need to leave a light on. But generally, it was like a very fun feeling. Do I believe in ghosts? I mean, I grew up in a house that was built in the 1730s in Connecticut, and it felt like, I think I believe that layers of time are not totally separate. Like, I love houses where I sort of feel that other things have happened there before me. I have never like seen an actual physical spirit, but I do believe that there are all kinds of things that I don't understand or know about. So
Nice.
I think that's my answer.
It's a question that we've had to pose to ourselves, and we posed it to our listeners. And it's been interesting to see their responses. And some people have told us about, actual interactions they've had.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. One of our listeners and friends said, I don't believe in ghosts, but I believe in God. And I don't know what that says about me, which is another interesting thing to think about, right?
Yeah. I am like in most areas of my life a pretty like type A rational person, but my fiction is very weird, and it does often unearth things that I write it and then I'm like, oh, so that's what I think about that. Like, I definitely think that there are mysteries that are not solvable, and that I nonetheless can't stop thinking about.
Well, and I think pregnancy is one of the biggest mysteries in life.
Me too. Yeah. And then this like person
Right.
is then just part of your life and like your most important thing, and yet completely beyond your control always.
Right.
So in some ways pregnancy is good training for you like bring into your life this thing that it's not really clear you could withstand the loss of. And yet it's really only so much your job to shape what that child's experiences are. You sort of do your best, but they are not you, which is a hard lesson, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
To learn over and over. My kids are in their 30s.
It's wild.
Yeah.
And there's nothing like, I think having two was a really good lesson in that way, because they were different from, I swear, their like first instance of life. I mean, I also think we project a lot of things backward onto those first moments once we know the people better. But it's like they arrive themselves, and they arrive kind of their own, they belong to themselves. But that is not an easy thing to internalize.
Well, I have one more very specific question. We have a lot of writers who listen to the podcast. And so I'm curious what writing tools you use to write.
Oh, like mechanically? Like,
yeah.
what do I
like? Like Scrivener? What types of pens or notebooks do you like? That kind of thing.
So I am so intrigued by Scrivener and have never used it. So I am pretty boring. I think also I really don't have a very spatial brain. I think I have a pretty visual brain, and as I said, like the images really matter a lot to me, but I don't. Like, I remember going to a revision workshop taught by a writer friend, and she was talking about how, like, she lays all the scenes out on the floor, and then she, like, has to move this one to this one. And I do tend to write kind of in order. I mean, sometimes things do need to move around, and sometimes, as I've said, like, I have to cut entire halves of books because they're in the wrong point of view. But I tend to, like, I type my first draft into Word, and I try to do that reasonably quickly because it's a very small part of the process for me, the first draft writing. And with the novel, because it's so daunting and giant, and because I really don't like first draft writing very much, I will make like ridiculous type A rules about how much I need to do per writing day. And for me, writing days are usually the days when my kids are at school. So kind of Monday through Friday. And they're usually pretty, I try to keep them pretty achievable no matter how kind of sideways the day goes. So I'll do things like, 2 double-spaced pages per day. And that's how I generate the draft. And then I do a lot of rounds of what I call revision, but is actually like 99% of the words get written during this time. And the process looks, the nearest description of it that I've found, it comes in George Saunders' A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. I don't know if you've read that. It's his craft book that's on Russian short stories, but really on his own craft ideas about Russian short stories. And he talks about how revision, or really most of writing for him, involves sort of rereading what he's done with a giant yes-no meter on his forehead. And anytime it drifts into the no, just something that's not pleasing to him, just performing an experiment, just doing something else with his pen. And then reading and reading and reading, and the whole thing kind of adjusts itself that way. I think the metaphor he uses is like a giant cruise ship, kind of like incrementally finding its path through these tiny little steerings that you're doing without planning them out. And so I do just for like much of my writing process, I'm carrying around these stacks of printed out paper that are just covered in blue ink. Like, it looks like I've lost my mind a little bit. And it's not really that you're fixing it. It's like something didn't make you happy yet. So you're like trying another thing, or like maybe that line of description isn't really like that vivid yet. So you're trying something else. And that's probably where like those weird vines and veininess of the marble come in, you know? And so I'll do that. And so sometimes I'll do that in kind of focused layers where, like, for a long time with The Garden, the two secondary characters who become Irene's friends were really not distinct enough. And so I did a pass through where I just printed out the pages that had to do with them. And I was reading through those with a pen and trying to figure out, like, who are they? Who are their husbands? What has brought them here? How are they different? What sorts of different things would they say? Or like The Garden was another of these kind of revision layers where I was really only looking at the scenes that take place in the garden and trying to figure out how to describe those differently. So really my tools are Microsoft Word, and then so many pieces of paper. I do have guilt sometimes, especially like in the messy middle of writing a novel where you're like, is this even worth all the trees' lives that it is? You know, and just this particular kind of blue pen. I wonder if I have one here. Oh, this one, I have it, but it's almost empty. So it's the Pilot blue.
Oh, yeah.
Partial to these. The ink is nice. It's like nice and inky. It has a nice smell. You know, they're good.
Yeah, that's nice. That's important to have a good pen that you rely on, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
And have them everywhere.
Yes, I do. I do go through a lot of these pens and a lot of stacks of printer paper.
Yeah. Well, those pens are cool because they have the little ink window.
Yes.
No, it is great. I have found that the drawback of these pens is that if you take them on airplanes, the next time you use them, like about half the time, there's just an explosion all over your fingers.
Oh, wow.
I think the pressure of the air in the cabin does something to me. So
that's like use fountain pens. Like, yeah, they're dangerous to fly with too.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about the cover? Because we love the cover art.
Oh, I've been so lucky with my covers. So this one, and I always blank on the name of the artist, so I might look her up, but she is a Brazilian photographer, and she does this series of uteruses made out of flowers. And so when my editor sent me this, she was like, we need to do something to like underscore that it's a uterus. And I was like, I think it's pretty clear. And then my daughter, who was at the time in, I think, 4th grade, she had just done her puberty unit. She was walking in back of me and she's like, it's a uterus. And I was like, okay, so I think we're good. I also feel like I want my covers to be beautiful, but like have a darkness to them. Mm-hmm. And I think that this one definitely, hits that spot. Because I always feel like if you pick it up just wanting historical fiction that's set in the 1940s, or with The Illness Lesson, just wanting like a book from sort of Little Women-y era, you're going to be very disappointed. Because I'm also like making up ghosts, and in The Illness Lesson, making up a species of bird. And so I think there is like a strangeness that I want to be sort of telegraphed too. Let me see.
I think her name is Katerina Suleiman.
Yes, that's right. Katerina Suleiman. Yep. Mm-hmm. We're Instagram friends. And then I just always have this moment of like a blanking. But yeah, she was the cover artist for The Garden. And then for The Illness Lesson, it's an embroidery artist named Michelle Kingdom, who I just think, and I think they're both just geniuses. And the Doubleday art director is so wonderful at finding, she'll send you to these websites of these artists and say like, how about this? And you're like, you are a genius.
That's cool. So nice.
Nice.
Well, we're here to say that The Garden was worth all the trees and all the paper.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that we read this as a buddy read, because it's one that you really do want to talk about. Thank you for talking to us about it. We really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it too.
Thanks for listening to The Book Cougars with Chris Wallach and Emily Fine. We'll be back again with another episode in 2 weeks. Until then, come chat with us on social media, Goodreads, or email us at bookcougars@gmail.com. If you'd like to help support our podcast, please tell others about us, leave a review wherever you listen, and consider becoming a patron. Even $1 a month is a big help. Learn more about that on our website, bookcougars.com, where you'll find the show notes for this and all of our past episodes.
Thanks, everybody.
This episode was edited by Pat Keogh Sound Design.